Okay. Welcome, everybody. I am not Brent Schlenker. I'm Karen Hyder, and I'm here with Patti Shank. And we're filling in for Brent, who is in Dallas. And we've got Luis standing by, as he always does, to make sure nothing goes horrifically wrong. And Luis and I have a history of working together on online events way back, it's like 12 years ago when no one else was doing webinars. Luis and I were doing webinars together. So it's good to be back, working in the old team together. And no doubt Patti Shank was one of our presenters back in those days too. So it's good to be here with Patti. I'd like to thank you all for welcoming me in today. I'd like to know a little bit about who's joining this session. I have not participated. I've only watched recordings of your daily events with TLDChat. So please let me know where you're joining from and what your interests are. And I'm looking forward to spending the next hour with you. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Karen Hyder. I'm an online event producer and webinar support person, webinar host. And I've been doing this work since, I like to say it this way, since the turn of the century. It's been a long time. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years working in a classroom, teaching people to click and double click. And decided to start doing that kind of work online. So I've been working online for many years. But this tool, actually, this crowdsource or crowdcast, is somewhat new to me. So I'm still learning the ropes here. Welcome. And Joe Cook is here. Hi, Joe. Good to have you with us. Bethany. Michelle, welcome. Thanks, Joe. Great. It's good to have you with us. And Josh is here. That's terrific. Oh, great. Hi, Marco. So again, I want to welcome everybody. We're going to be officially kicking off our session in about just 1 minute. So if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm Karen Hyder, and I'm here with Patti Shank. Today, we're going to be talking about the science of learning in Patti's new book. I have a copy of it right here. Twin copies. It's an excellent book, really, Patti, I've got to say. We'll gush more about that in a few minutes. Hi, Mike Lenz. Good to have you with us. And Mike Simmons, welcome. Got the two mics. Great. Well, I see a lot more names popping up here in chat, and I'm eager to see more. Just joining, please let us know who you are and where you're coming in from. I'm Karen Hyder, an online event producer and speaker coach here with Patti Shank. And our purpose today is to talk to you about Patti's Make It Learnable series. But I know that at the beginning of your typical TLD chats every day, Brent reminds you of the day of the week and where we are in our concentric circle of planning. And on Tuesdays, we're talking about projects. So today we're going to be talking about the projects that you're doing around writing. And, you know, honestly, Patti, I have a degree in writing. My undergraduate degree is in English and writing. And I got so much out of this book, just really partly validating that there were some things that I was doing that were the right things, but partly setting me straight on some things that I'd been doing wrong all along. So I do hear a little feedback, Josh. I'm getting a little feedback on audio. So you know what? I'm going to let Patti.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Patti Shank, and I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and it's going to be a steamy 95 or 98 today, so I'm not looking forward to that. I'm one of those people that has a really narrow range of comfort, somewhere between 74 and 5. But I'll be writing all day today, and we're going to talk about writing. We're also going to talk about how writing helps learning or hinders it. and some other things like book 2, what I'm working on now, and what the difficulties of doing something like this are, because people are asking me how fast can I get these books out, and the answer is now that I have a template from the first book, I can get them out fairly quickly. But I'll tell you a little bit about my process, and I'd love to know more about your process when you're doing writing as well. So a little bit about my background. I started out as a trainer in healthcare, and I was a product trainer for the pharmaceutical industry, products and human anatomy, and those sorts of things. And I traveled all over the Eastern Coast, East United States, with other pharmaceutical sales reps and helped them with their product knowledge. And I loved it. And what I didn't know at the time, and it was interesting, was that what I did was in a ladder to become a district manager. I didn't want to become one. I wanted to keep doing training. So when they offered me a job as the district manager in Chicago, I cut bait. I jumped ship. I took a job as the head of training for a healthcare company, a healthcare delivery system in the Washington, D.C. area. And I just loved it. It was just the best job ever. And I was there until we moved to Denver, Colorado to follow my husband's job. And I've been a freelancer ever since. I miss working with people on a regular basis, which brings me up to date with working with Karen, because Karen and I worked together at the E-Learning Guild, where I was their research director. And Karen's one of my favorite people on the entire earth. It's true. And I love working with really positive, wonderful people. And Karen's one of the best. And so when I left the guild, Karen and I decided we were going to continue to work together. We'll talk more about that. But when Brent was unable to be here today, he asked me who could do this. And I said, Karen, because Karen has a wonderful online personality. So I wanted you guys to meet her. Anyway, that's me in a nutshell.
You know me, Patti. I'll take any dare, right? I'll do
anything. You will. And so will I.
Yeah, so it's actually been really interesting to work with Patti. And actually, Patti, if you can mute your mic while I'm talking, I think we'll reduce that feedback there. Are you able to mute your icon using the little controller at the top of your video? Okay, good. So, I've been a trainer for many years. I spent many days in a classroom teaching people to click and double click for the first time. And then I moved on to teaching people how to be good trainers. I ran a Train the Trainer program for logical operations for many years and got poached. I ended up living abroad for a while teaching a Train the Trainer program there. And when I came back to the States, I just couldn't bear the thought of working in a training organization where I had to swipe a badge to move from one part of the building to the other. I just wasn't a corporate kind of person, and I didn't really want to do, just like what Patti was saying, I had to cut bait. I didn't want to do what they wanted to promote me into. I really just wanted to be a trainer. So I've continued to spend many years teaching people how to teach both online and in person. And I help people earn CTT certification. In fact, I'm doing a session at CompTIA's upcoming event in Austin. So if you ever want to talk about training or virtual classroom, I'm your guy. I'd love to talk about it. Actually, I would continue to talk about it, but there will be a big hook that drags me off the stage if I talk too long. But what's interesting is, this is my space, training and talking about training. And some of the things that I've learned over really close to 30 years teaching adult learners is, some of the things we learned weren't really accurate. Like learning styles, we put a lot of emphasis on learning styles and then found that those were debunked later. But, I think when I started talking to Patti about the science of learning, really what does the research say? What makes adult learners learn. Some of the things I knew to be true, I witnessed them happening. I know that adult learners, for one thing, don't like to have things shoved down their throats. They like to have choices. Simple things like that can make the difference between what feels like good training and what feels like bad training. But when you think about how to design for and organize and write for, it's kind of a daunting task. Like, how do you say all the right things in all the right ways? So I know Patti put really hundreds of hours into research to find just the tactics in this book. And I sat down and read it cover to cover. I had actually read it electronically already, and I wrote my little blurb for the inside the front cover, but I sat down and read the book cover to cover in one day and made a lot of notes about the things that I thought I could immediately start using in the virtual classroom. And I'll just start with a quick example, and that is, I think too often people are really dismissive about things as simple as the learning objectives, because if you signed up for a class, don't you know what the learning objectives are? And the answer is no. I signed up because the title seemed interesting, or I signed up because my boss told me to. I didn't sign up because I was really paying attention to what I was going to learn. And I think right there is the difference between learning commitment and being passive about the learning. So in here we're talking about, this book talks about organizing for, and in the virtual classroom, I like to make sure participants know what it is that we're going to be covering. And I typically do that with like a poll where I'm asking people, which of these objectives do you want to learn? But Patti pointed out to me, it's also important to go one step further and say, if I didn't include the objective that you wanted to learn here, please let me know by typing in chat, so we continually keep it open for adult learners to make choices about what they want to learn. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
That's great stuff. And when you and I were talking about that, one of the things you said to me that I thought was really important is, well, what if you're not going to cover what they want to learn? Well, that's fine. You've got a training plan, but it's important for people to understand that they are also responsible for what they want to learn. And like in any good training, virtual training class, other people in the class also have resources for them. And so if they can put it out there to say, this is what I need to know about this, if you're not covering that, maybe someone else can help them with that. The social aspects, now I didn't cover any social aspects in this particular book because this is about writing. And learning sciences are nuanced. I'm writing right now an article about whether learning should be easy or whether it should be hard. And the answer to that question is it should be easy and hard. Depends on the situation. And it's, so everybody's looking for the fun in learning, but sometimes it can be fun, but sometimes it's not fun and it can't be fun. So let's go back to what you just said, Karen. You said asking people for what it is they need. So the research is very clear about that is the engagement we're looking for. Fun is fleeting. Engagement means it meets their needs. Adults, that the research is clear that the highest level of engagement is it meets their needs. And we can't always meet every one of their needs, but they've got a whole social group there around what you're teaching, and that group can help them meet their other needs. So I would like to ask you, because you've had so much experience with this, is how have you seen others in the group meet people's needs in training where you couldn't meet their needs at that exact moment?
It's happening already right here. Look at the posts in chat. I mean, Joe Cook has already filled in the gap on the debunking of learning styles conversation. Like, it's not something we're going to have time to talk about in the few minutes we have here, but she's providing a resource to somebody who's going, what do you mean debunking learning styles? So we become each other's gap fillers in or memory holders. Like I didn't remember what SWOT analysis stood for, and somebody suddenly is typing in SWOT and what that spells. So those little efforts make a big difference when the trainer can't do it all. You know, I
Right.
can't speak and type.
Right. Right. And another thing research tells us is that the more expertise someone has, the less possible it is for a trainer to meet everyone's needs. That's where an expert has to be involved in the training, and the expert has to be trained to train, but they don't know everything because it's getting more and more complex in the world where, people will say to me, I'll be working with a client, for example, and they'll say, what do you mean you don't know everything there is to know about LMSs? I barely know. I know how to put content into LMSs. I can't help them pick one. And the truth is that I go to my friends who are much more expert with that, and they can get help there. The world is getting to be very complex. E-learning is a very complex field. Learning itself is huge. I've chosen in the last couple of years to focus on because jobs are getting more complicated and jobs are changing very rapidly, that people have to learn very quickly on their own. What can we take from the research that helps people be able to stay up to date? And one person can't do it all. We all have to help each other. So that's one of the points. One of the reasons I started with this book is because if you cannot write well, writing is the foundation of all design of learning. Even if your learning is going to end up as narration or video, you start with a script, right? So you have to be able to write in a certain way. And the research is very clear about what we need to do to make our learning content understandable. So I started there because it's the starting point of everything we design. It wasn't the thing that interested me the most. It's the thing that is the most foundational. And so it's funny. The reason it took me so long to write it is that I was looking for a template for putting this out that I could use for the next 4 or 5 books. And basically, I'm taking a particular issue with learning design and saying, what does the research say about this? And I needed to come up with a template, and I rewrote it probably 6 times, so it took a year. The template works. People have told me it works, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the specific tactics and examples. But I've already had a couple people who I just love, who have written me very specific suggestions for making it even a little bit better. And so after I'm done with book 2 or 3, I'm going to revisit. Their suggestions will be in book 2, but I'll revisit book 1 again and put their suggestions in there. And by the way, just for anyone who's going to buy it, my suggestion is that you buy the print version. I know it's more expensive, but you can do things in print that are hard to do in Kindle. I'm learning how to do Kindle better and how to make Kindle much better experience, but we'll talk about self-publishing later. I'd like to say that. Anyway, I'd love your comments on what you thought about the template and whether it works and can be used over and over again. And I'd actually answer any questions.
There are some questions coming in chat if you take a look and mute while I'm talking. And I'll say, yeah, the template, I think what you're referring to here is the fact that throughout the book, you're implementing the techniques that you're telling us to implement. So for instance, it's important for us to have repetition. It's important for us to have near-term and sort of long-term memory activities. So after we're reading something and identifying with something, then you compel us in the book to make notes and answer questions about what it was that we were just doing. And then at the end of the section or at the end of the book, you revisit that same idea that you're going to review these things that were covered earlier. And I think, that's very fundamental to learning, period. But I fear that it's something that disappears when we have urgency around the learning process, where we don't have time to stop and let people reflect. We don't have time to stop and let people apply, because we just have to cram more stuff in. This 8-hour course that used to have lots of practice units and interactions and things like that now is a 90-minute webinar that nobody has a chance to apply. And I'm sorry, but giving them the handouts is not learning. They're not going to go back on some random Tuesday and apply their skills by themselves in a cubicle. So they're here in the context of the learning. Let's make them do these activities that are good for them while we have them. And I think that was really so appropriate in this book. You made me do things that I would not think to do right then. I would put it off, but you keep inviting me back to participate in as I apply good practices.
So one of the issues is this. The research says over and over, and it's by all the researchers, that there are certain ways that we retain information over time. And there's a split between retaining for testing and retaining for use. And you'll read a lot about this in book 2 because it's on practice and feedback. And what you do to retain for a test and retain for use, which is for application, totally different. If we want people, we can't change how we remember. We can't change how our minds and our memories and how attention work. If our purpose is to check boxes that someone has taken this training, fine, do whatever you want. But if our purpose is for people to gain skills that they use on the job, we cannot change our attentional and memory systems. We have to train in accordance with how they work, or the training is a complete waste of time. We might as well not even do it. We might as well fire every single L&D department and just have corporate communications put together whatever it is people need to read and have you check a box at the bottom and sign it. Because, and this is just like any other professional, you and I are in charge of telling our leaders how things work. IT people, the security people in IT have to explain what the sweet spot is of security and allowing people to get work done, right? They have to. You can't have the CEO deciding what security policy needs to be. He doesn't know how that works. He might, he might. That might have been his expertise in the past, but you have a CIO for that reason, because that person needs to understand that. Our learning people need to understand what it is to really learn. And if you've got training that really people just need to check a box because it's really for defense against lawsuits, fine. Don't build wonderful courses. Just have them read it and sign it. I mean, that makes sense. But if people need to learn skills for their job, we cannot get them to learn those skills unless they follow how our brains work, how our memory works. It's the reason I'm writing this, because we need to be effective. When we can't be effective, we can't cram information in. And so what we do is we pick the most important information, and we know we don't learn most of our information from training. We learn most of it on the job. If we're training people, pick the most important information, teach it in the way that people learn, and use the techniques which help people retain for the long term. Because what people will show you they've learned in training is not what helps them retain for the long term. It's very clear. Our intuitions about what works are wrong. That's just the way it is. It's one of the reasons that learning styles is so seductive, because it seems to make so much sense. But the research shows that there's a negative correlation between how people retain and what they think works. And the research is so strong. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about effect size, but effect size is just how big of an effect a certain strategy has, and it's between 0 and 1. And 1 means very high and 0 means none. And the effect size for learning styles is negative. People pick the wrong style for retention. And if we're training for retention, we must do what's needed. And people, that's why Will Thalheimer in his book about smile sheets says, don't worry about whether people liked it, worry about whether it worked. How does that sound to you? I mean, I know you and I, Karen, have been talking about it, because we're going to work together on helping people understand how to actually apply these things. One of the things people say to me all the time, and it's the reason you and I are working together, is this research is really hard to read. And it is, because there are times when I'm reading it where I just have to put it down, go take a walk. The research is hard to read, but it is not hard to apply. And that's why I'm writing the books, because it's easy to apply. It's not hard to apply, so we should apply it. I'd love your thoughts on that, and also any questions.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments and questions coming in here, but I just want to comment on the applying part. I think part of the applying is that having somebody validate for you that this is the right way to do it. If you're like me and your experience comes from different, parts of walks of life and roles, you may be following policies or following ways of doing things that seem to make sense. And one of the things that you and I have talked about, Patty, that comes up a lot is people think that their learners are so special, or their content is so special. My content is so special it can't possibly be done in a webinar format, or my learners are so special that they don't need us to dumb down our writing for them. And I think that we're not doing anybody any favors by making our writing more complicated. We need to keep it simple and keep it accurate. Can you speak a little bit more to that? And
yeah, a couple of questions. I'd like to just talk. Oh, I'd love to go on 42 miles of trail. Where are you, Deborah? I love to go walking, and when I'm frustrated, that's what I do, is I just go walk. Yeah, it's that whole issue of clarity, and I talk about this at length in the book. It is reading level and learnability, and I picked the word learnability because it's critical, and it also gets at that cross level of what should be easy and what should be hard. The reading level should be easy because, and here's the reason why, people come across, and this is at work, people come across so much reading in their work that they're bombarded with reading. And so it doesn't matter what level of reading they have. The research says that people generally are able to read on a level that's about 2 levels below their level of education, but that's what level they're able to read at difficult work. So I just said something a few minutes ago that explained this well. I have a PhD and I'm reading learning research and information design research and cognitive research, and I can only do it for about an hour at a time because it's all written in crazy difficult language. And then I have to translate it into normal language, right? So you would think, well, what's the problem, Patty? Are you stupid? Why, you have a PhD, why can't you read PhD language? Because it's written too hard. Why can't they just say you should write at a reading level that's easy to read because it doesn't tax you as much? That's, they take 14 sentences to say that in all these articles on readability, and it took me weeks to understand this, like 14 articles about readability because they were written at such a high level. And basically it comes down to this: if you're reading a ton of stuff every day and it's at a very high level, you have to think too much. And by the way, think too much equals cognitive load. If you've heard the term cognitive load, it means you have to think too much, and it hurts. It hurts, and it means that if you're thinking too much, it's just too hard. That's all it means. And I use those terms judiciously because I want you to know the main terms because you're going to see them. That's it. Cognitive load just means too much mental effort. And so why do we have to use those words? Well, I'm going to tell you why they use those words, because they're not writing for Karen and Patty and Josh and Dana and Kara. They're not writing for Alice and Katie. They're writing for Dr. So-and-so. And yes, I have a doctorate, but I don't work as an academic. So you and I have to write for a level that makes it easy for people to understand. Blatantly easy. And let me tell you something about me. I have a hard time doing that. I use too many words. And so I work with an editor on almost everything because I say things in 25 words that could be said in 12. I'm getting better and better and better. And by the time I'm 85, I'll probably be good. And so that's right. IKEA is a great example. And I could talk for 45 minutes on the use of visuals versus, and I'll be writing one of my books on that maybe. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise. And most of the books, there's a book, if you go on my website, which is pattishank.com, Patty is spelled with an I. There's a book on graphics that I highly recommend, written by a PhD whose expertise is graphics. And she writes as clearly as I do, maybe more so. And her book is hard to find because it's out of print, but just look for it because there's a lot of that book floating around. Make sure you get the second edition. Like I said before, the research is hard. The applications are not so hard. For example, using simple words, shorter sentences. I tend to use long sentences. Run on. Didn't they call them run on sentences back then? So that's the point. I'm going to stop for a second and just take a look at what people are writing so we can both maybe
Yeah, there's a lot of good comments coming in here, so I think it's worth taking a look and commenting on what you're seeing there. But you know, even idiomatic language can be dense, where people are using these embedded stories like phrases like the cart before the horse. It doesn't really make sense anymore. Like, why are we using that? Can't we just say put it first?
I put a couple of links in the book to really good resources for getting your language simpler. One is, hold on, I'm going to look it up, okay? So, I mean, I don't care if you buy the book or you don't, but I do want you to have this resource. I'm going to page 48 for any of you who have the book. Okay, look this up on your search page, because it would be hard for me to actually type this in right now. But it's Dr. G. Kim blank, and it's his wordiness list, and it's fabulous. And I use it all the time to get. I just take about 5 words at a time, and things that I use all the time. And he teaches us, he's an English professor, and he teaches us how to make our wording simpler. It's just a phenomenal resource. Someone else had a question. Right, one of the activities I do in workshops on this is to ask people to write a paragraph on how to do something. And then I have them show them how to figure out how many words are in it using Word, and then take out half the words and then do it again. And almost everyone is freaked out by how you can do it twice and still mean the same thing. And we have to do that in training. I'll give you for instance, a really close friend of mine, an instructional designer who lives here in Colorado, went to her leadership to say, okay, I've been running all of our training materials through reading level tests. And by the way, Word does that. And they're coming out at a 14 grade reading level. And we're doing training for people in the electric and oil and gas fields. And most of these people have about a 9 to 12 education. We have to rewrite our materials. And at first they said no. And then she showed them all the research, because she asked me for the research. And the research isn't plainly written, but because it's for other academics. But she went and she rewrote it. And she did a test. She gave a page of the previous materials and the rewritten materials to 5 people and asked them which they felt were better written. And all 5 chose the rewritten materials. And they're beginning to listen to her. And I just gave her the book. I mean, we didn't do any workshop. I didn't write the book in order to do workshops. I wrote the book so that people could take it and just do exactly what I was saying. But I had specific specs for the book, under 200 pages, 20 to 30 tactics, very simple, and someone that wasn't even in L&D, who teaches other people, a subject matter expert, for example, my vet, could use it to write good materials. And I gave it to my vet, and she rewrote some of her materials, and she said they're much better, and so it works. I mean, it's just good practice. That's all.
It's easier than you think it is.
Pardon, I didn't hear you.
It's easier than you think it is.
It is. I agree with that.
Tell us more about the series, though, Patti. You're going to do, what, 4 of these books?
I don't know. I actually have a list of potential topics. I'll tell you what some of them are. I don't have them in front of me. The next one is already in process. It's on what does the research say about practice and feedback? And that's fascinating. Totally different than what we normally do. And it's actually changing my own practice because I've found things that I don't do and am now doing. And I've thought about doing one on writing multiple choice questions because some of the things in practice and feedback are around testing. Testing as learning experiences. Testing is a phenomenal experience for helping people recall. It's called the testing effect. And the testing effect says that when we test people with low stakes or no stakes tests, meaning there's no grade, that what it does is it stimulates neurons to form deeper connections. So if you want people to retain stuff, and remember that you test, you don't have them reread. Rereading does almost nothing. That's why flashcards work better than rereading your material, so that you're retesting. And it forms deeper connections between the neurons. And so if we're going to do testing, then we have to know how to do good testing. So, and I can't fit that in the second book. It's only one of the strategies. There's a ton of strategies for remembering. So I'm thinking about doing a book on testing, how to write good questions, how to, and maybe I'll combine it with scenarios. I'm not sure. All the different ways you can do kind of retrieval testing. And I've also thought about writing one on how to do performance analysis, so that, and that's an area of deep interest and skill for me, is why should we be doing any training at all on things where training is not a good solution? So it's something I do with every client. They just don't know I'm doing it. Because if I use those words, they go, oh, we don't need that. We just need training. And most of the time, training may be a solution, but it's only a partial solution. So if you don't have the things to back it up, like support, and research is really clear about that, if there's no support for what you're training won't work.
I think we've all suffered through that.
Yes, and so we need to know that up front. And if there are things, if people go back to a hostile environment for what they learned, training won't work. So there are things that we need to do up front to determine what's causing the problem and whether training will be supported. So the trained skills will be supported. There's also things that we need to do as L&D to support growth along the path to proficiency. And for the most part, we only train for a very base or foundational level of proficiency. And I'm saying for the most part, in many things, and that's totally inadequate. And in today's workplace, that's a recipe for disaster, because if people can't move up the level of proficiency, organizations fail. So that's another thing I'm thinking about. It just depends. The biggest problem for me is it takes hundreds of hours to read the research. So, I just need people to tell me what tell me if this is valuable to them. And you're not paying for the 180 pages of book, you're paying for the research. And I I'm self-publishing so that I can save money, so that I can make these really, really inexpensive. So that I'm loving it. I'm, you know, how far I go will just depend on what people want. And I'm hoping to get this stuff out there, because I really am really excited that people are buying it, and they are, which is happy time for Patti.
It's really good stuff. I mean, there's a lot of excellent information in there, and I am eagerly awaiting the next installment, because I think that this, you know, sets us all sort of on a new path of best practices.
Right, or actually using the science to make us better, which other fields do all the time. You know what field I call to mind is user experience, UX. They use the exact same base of research, and they get paid well and get to use it, and they're expected to use it, because they set the standard as, this is what we do and this is how we do it. We need to do the same. Like, for instance, clarity and interface design, we all need to do the same exact thing, not just throw things on a page, you know, and they use the research. So you know, that's another thing. On my website, I have a book about interface design for learning. I was going to write that, and I wasn't all that happy about writing it, because I'm not an interface designer. I know a lot about it, but somebody who is an interface designer wrote a book about it, and I found it. It's a fantastic book. You should buy it. You know, it's great. So I have a page on other people's books that have been the most valuable to me.
So you don't need to write it. There's already something out there.
Yay.
But, you know, I wanted to talk about a little bit about something I was thinking about with your book, and also Mark Grant's comment there about combining with X API, the idea that you could potentially customize, like identify competency gaps and customize. And actually, could you mute while I'm talking? Because it's I hear the echo. So, you know, I was thinking about that as I was reading your book, and I've been thinking about that over the last couple of years, actually, because it seems like there was a point at which spray and pray, show up and throw up, chalk and talk were the way to go. You know, the one size fits all kind of training, because we needed to move people through the process. We needed to get hundreds of people trained. We needed to do it 8 hours at a time, because that was the functional way, the logistical way to get training to happen. But I feel like the pendulum is swinging way industrial. Yeah. I feel like the pendulum is swinging way, 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 way over to just in time and highly, highly customized training, because our users, our learners, the people we support are going out to the web and Googling something before they try to do it. You know, you're not installing something in your home without running the YouTube video first to see how it's done. So how can we use the strategies from your book that talk about essentially identifying the audience and then writing for that audience, when our audience could be different? I mean, we might literally have a different need from every user who comes to us. So how do you design that?
That's a really good question, and it's a very difficult question, because the research shows that people with less knowledge and people with more knowledge need very different approaches and instructional strategies. I'll talk about this in book 2, but for practice, I'll give you an example. And actually, there was Alice asked the question whether I read the research as hard copies or online. And Alice, if I answer that question, you'll know that I'm old. I read it as hard copies. I print them out so that I can write notes on them. And I'd love to know why you're asking that question. I have online copies of everything I download, so I can go back to it. And so I can send copies to other people. And that actually brings up a whole bunch of other questions, like how did I get that when I'm not a faculty member? But if you look on the back of my books, it says that there's special thanks to certain people who actually are supporting me by giving me access to research databases. I couldn't do this work without them, and they're my special angels. Okay, about customizing. This is where it gets so nuanced. I don't even know how to answer the question. I'm trying to pick which nuance to talk about. So I'm going to pick this nuance. Most of the things that we train are foundational level. Most, okay, so this doesn't apply to everything, but most of the things that L&D trains is foundational level. So we know how to train foundational level, and it's worked examples, and I mean, there's a variety of approaches. We don't train people with a lot more expertise the same way, and people with a lot of expertise know how to find their own information. You don't get to have a lot of expertise without knowing how to find your own information, your own practice. That's how people find. We also know, and this is really important, that there is a path of knowledge till you have what we call a mental model of a specific domain. So let's say you're going to build web pages, and you're going to learn HTML first, then HTML5, and then you're going to add on JavaScript and add on other things. But you're going to learn in a sort of progression. And if you try to do it outside of that progression, it's going to be harder, and you're going to have misunderstandings. And misunderstandings are really difficult to overcome because your mental model is screwed up. And you have things attached to each other in long-term memory that shouldn't be attached. One of the things we know is that long-term memory is all about relationships between items. That's why it's hard to remember. That's why it's when you hear a song from your childhood, you can remember what was going on at that time. Remember, right? It's like when I hear a whiter shade of pale, I'm not kidding. Some of you don't even know what that song was. I was in Kaufman camp, and there was this chubby little boy who was in love with me that I ran from. I was 13 years old, and I was like, oh, cooties, that sort of stuff. That's what was going on during Whiter Shade of Pale. It's like, because long-term memory is mostly semantic, which means meaning. And so if we learn things and our connections are messed up, that's what misunderstandings are. So it's better if someone can help us. And that's what that organization of learning piece is all about. Organize it the way it is actually organized so that people get it right from the beginning, and make sure, and that's another thing that will be in book 2, is make sure you stop and check that the understandings are correct and things are correctly connected. Because if they're not correctly connected, then everything from then on is messed up. So this personalized issue is super complicated because we can't personalize until we know what they know. And understanding what they know is a very critical design issue. And so the first question is, are people at a lower level of skill? If they are, there's certain things we need to do. One is check their mental model, how things are organized in their brain, and make sure it's right. Make sure they have the foundational skills before they get more. understanding HTML before you understand CSS, all of that sort of stuff. It is like, it's a way, and that's true with learning too. There's certain foundational issues for every domain, and it's the reason we use trainers rather than experts to train. But the problem is that trainers don't understand the basic science of our own field. And that would never fly in another field. IT people understand the basics of their field. Carpenters understand the basics of their field. Carpenters may not know the physics of their field, but they know that if they don't use the physics, walls fall down. Like if you don't build something a certain way, it doesn't stand the test of time. If you don't use certain kinds of wood for outdoor applications, it doesn't work. So that's why I got so interested in this, because training is failing our organizations, especially now. Right now, the world is in a type of chaos that is not going to change. There's accelerating change that is causing people and jobs to change at a very rapid pace. And L&D has to be able to help. And content isn't the answer. It's people have too much content, which is why I started with book one. People already have too much content. We have to be able to train people and help them gain skills in a way they've never had to do before. In the 1950s, somebody who was a bookkeeper did the same thing for 20 years or 30 years. Bookkeepers don't do the same thing now for 2 months. They're learning new skills, they're learning new tools, and the laws are changing around them all the time. And most of the bookkeeping skills are being done by computers.
Well, to defend trainers, I have to say we've been measuring the wrong things. Our organization has been measuring the wrong things and teaching us to measure the wrong things. Plus, we're motivated by ego in some cases. So there are a few comments in chat. Go ahead.
Well, we're also measuring butts and seats, which is nothing. I mean, it's literally nothing. It's actually negative. I mean, we can make huge strides in our organizations and help our organizations with this overwhelming change that's happening in the world. I mean, we've got the keys.
Well, great. I guess we need to start applying things. So there are some additional questions coming in chat. In fact, Alice just asked one now. How much time do we spend learning the tools when we should be learning the content? And I'm not sure which tools you mean, the tools that we use to learn with, like, for instance, this tool, Crowdcast or YouTube. And I think it's relative. You know, we might have to spend 10 minutes ramping up for the tools so that we can access those tools regularly over time. But you definitely want the UX to be usable enough that you're not stumbling.
Right. We've got the same problem everybody else in our organization has, and that is that our job is changing really, really fast. And that's happening to the people in IT, that's happening to the people in finance. It's the same everywhere. It's the people who can learn new things fast and accept that challenge who are going to survive. And you know, my answer to that is the science of learning shows us a lot of how to make it easier to learn. There's just such great information out there. And I am happy to keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm working with you, Karen, because you're so good at it. Karen, just so that the rest of you know, Karen and I are working on how to apply what I'm doing, science of learning, to synchronous and asynchronous modes of training. So I'm writing the books which are agnostic to where you apply it to. And Karen and I are working together to apply it to virtual classroom and to self-paced training. And we're going to be doing sessions on that. We're going to start with some free sessions, and no, they're not going to be typical webinars where we're just trying to get you to buy something. We're going to do free sessions to give you information to help you figure out how to use these sessions with the science of learning. And we're also going to be speaking together on this exact topic, how to apply, write, and organize for deeper learning at Online Learning 2017. That's, Karen and I are really good at working together, and so that's what the two of us are doing. And I also hope to get a whole bunch of, Karen's the one who taught me how to be a virtual trainer. There's few people on earth I love more than her. So, what can I say? I'm the same on screen and off screen. If I love you, I love you. So what can I say?
Well, thank you so much. And it was really so fun.
We don't have a lot of time.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It was really so fun to spend this hour with you chatting about your book and your strategies here. I do want to open things up. If participants have questions that we didn't respond to, please type in chat. We still have another minute. I'm going to paste my email address in here. If anybody has questions for me, you can communicate with me after the session. And Patti,
Alice, that's a really good comment. Yes, and the other thing that I'm writing about in the second book is we have to figure out what people need to remember on their jobs and what they need to remember in order to look things up. We have the wrong notion that people can look everything up. They can't. You've been on the phone with people who are helping you and you knew they were looking everything up, but if you don't understand things, you can't look everything up. There's a base of knowledge and skill you need to have to understand what you're looking at. That notion that you can look everything up is just completely mistaken. You have to have skill and understanding to understand what you're looking at.
And the context to apply what you've learned. So
right. And context is everything.
It is, of course. That's a topic for another session. So we've just come to the top of our hour, and I certainly don't want to go over time, but I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and thank you, Louise and Brent, for inviting us in. Good to be with you. If you do have questions, please continue to chat or email us, and we're happy to follow up after the fact. It's good to see some friendly faces out there.
Bye, everybody.
Best wishes, everybody. Bye-bye.